okay? And then they stop every so often, they scoop it all out, and then they pan it for, or process it for the gold that was in there. What happened was that they simply filled up our rivers. And that was the big, horrible problem for Sacramento. When the gold rush started, you could bring an ocean-going vessel to Sacramento. It was a port. Everybody came up to Sacramento by ocean-going vessels. But as the miners washed more and more dirt down into the Sacramento River by way of the Yuba and the American, and everything ended up in the Sacramento, they raised the level of the river so high that you could no longer get a ship up here, which caused us, well, when I was a very little girl, I'm really old, but I was a very little girl, my dad took us to see the last trip of the Delta King, because the Delta King and the Delta Queen went between Sacramento and San Francisco, you know, every other day, and you could go overnight, sleep in a boat, you know, go overnight. The Delta King is now on the Mississippi River, and it goes up and down and takes tourists, and it's kind of fun. I went on one of those paddle wheelers. They're neat. They were paddle wheelers, but see, very shallow draft. So we lost our port because of that. The two things raised up the level. We had to raise our levees or build levees, because now suddenly the river, instead of being like this, was like this. Well, where's the water going, you know? So Sacramento was no longer a port. Now what happened was, by 1886, there were more farmers than there were miners. So they were able to vote and outlaw hydraulic mining forever. And that was, but you had to change the balance, because of course the first major flood of people who came were miners, not farmers. The farmers followed. The first people who came were farmers. You know, the Donner Party and those people, the people who came with Jim Bishop and whatever, they were farmers. But after 49, almost everyone came, and they were miners, or they were the smart ones, like the big four who built the railroad: Crocker, Huntington, Sanford, and one other. Anyway, Stanford. They simply made money off the farmers, off the miners. You know, they sold, you know, Mr. Levi came. He came with material to build tents. And it turned, he said, well, they didn't need tents anymore. What'll I do with this? I guess I'll make pants. Just, it's interesting how it all kind of ties together. Anyway, so, but it was too little too late, because the river had already risen. Now, it didn't get any worse, but it didn't get any better either. So today, several decades ago, we built the Deepwater Port channel, the channel into the Deepwater Port. They just simply came out of the river here and went like this and found Lake Washington and made the port where we ship out of Sacramento, out of West Sacramento. But they had to dig that. And they do have to dredge it all the time, because still does, of course, come down the river. That's what forms deltas, and that's why at the bottom of every major river there's a delta, like New Orleans, which is 17 feet underwater. That's a little scary. The rivers affect our commute. So you go up 50, and where can you go across? You can go across on the Howe Bridge, Howe Avenue Bridge, the Watt Avenue Bridge, Sunrise. And then to get across further, you have to go across at Folsom to get into the American River Canyon. When you're coming from the south, you can come all the way up I-5. We probably cross some bridges on the small creeks, the small rivers that go across. Nothing as big as the ones that take us in and out of town, but the bottleneck where I live in East Sacramento is to try to get out on E Street over the river and under the railroad tracks on the Cap City Freeway. We need another bridge. We need another entrance there, desperately. In the 1970s, we owned, the county owned an entire right-of-way from 50 to 80. And there was plans for a bridge at Arden Bar, would have given us another access. You wouldn't have had to drive through 25 lights to get into Carmichael. You know, it was the thing to do, but not in my backyard took place. And then Sandy Smoley, whom I love dearly, but she campaigned on, I won't let him build that bridge. and she won for supervisor, and they didn't, and they sold off all the right-of-way. Senecal Retreat, one of the most expensive places on Fair Oaks Boulevard, is on part of that right-of-way. You can't ever get the land back, which is really a bad thing. But bridges. Coming into town, fortunately, they built a really big bridge on I-5 crossing, and again, these are all mostly crossing the American, you see, because we're between on this side, crossing the American. Now going down to San Francisco, of course, we have the Tower Bridge and then the Pioneer Bridge, I guess it's called. But bridges were important. If you go down and travel through the Delta, which is really fun, you're going to find every kind of bridge, because there are so many waterways down there. And, you know, there are bridges that lift up and bridges that go sideways and some that go over. But I've sat for 10 minutes waiting for a little sailboat to go by because they raised the bridge or tipped the thing up. And that's just one of the things you do when you're going over water. Dams. So we have flooding. One of the first major dams that came in was during the 30s, and it was Shasta Dam. It was a WPA project, and it was one of the first things that helped us stop flooding down the Sacramento. But of course, one of the biggest problems we had was not flooding from the Sacramento, it was flooding from the American. In 1943, my father was the president of the Chamber of Commerce in Sacramento, and he went with some local leaders back to Washington, D.C., and you've heard this before, to lobby not for defense contracts for Sacramento. We were in the middle of World War II. They went to lobby for the Folsom Dam, and they were successful. So that was one of the first ones, and I brought something to show you because I think it is so fun. In 1956, my dad was the master of ceremonies for the dedication of the dam, and everybody got a present, the bigwigs that sat on the podium, a cigarette lighter. Would we do that today, right? And here's a picture of the dam on the back, and on front, and the back says Folsom Dam dedication May 5th, 1956. I'll pass it around just because I think it's a kick. Make sure it comes back. Family heirloom. Since then, many dams were added down the Central Valley. There's the Don Pedro Dam, the Oroville Dam up on the Yuba River. We could use more. You know, there's been the fight all these years about the Auburn Dam and whether we should build it and we shouldn't build it, and it's taking away whitewater. And there are many reasons against, but I think there are more reasons for that, because I'm in favor of it. What do dams give us? They give us hydroelectric power. They give us water control when we don't want too much water, and give us back the water when we need it. There's every good reason to have dams, in my opinion. But you know what's interesting is in this region, the flooding that happens mostly has not been from dams or the problems or levees or breaking of levees, not from the Sacramento, not from the American River, but from the small creeks. In 1986, I was buying and fixing up and selling foreclosures. Bad idea. Oh, I lost a lot of money. But in any case, in 86 in February, it rained for 13 days straight. And those of you who are here will remember it was very, very bad because the water got up in the American River to within a foot of the dam, top of the dam. I hear rumors that they had considered blowing out the side of the dam on that side so that it wouldn't flood downtown, because you can't imagine what would happen if the whole state capitol flooded and all the records and that sort of thing. Fortunately, it stopped raining just in time. But where I had two houses that we had just rehabbed flooded was on Arden Creek. One end to the other. This creek just flooded. When you think about Woodside, if you ever sell a Woodside condo, you have to disclose about the fact that it's flooded 2 or 3 times. There's no river there. There is a drainage ditch that comes down, and there's too much water in it. I can remember even just sitting like 2 years ago in my office at 28th and J when we had a deluge of water, and the water, there was a manhole out in the street that went 3 feet in the air with the water because they couldn't, it was so much pressure on trying to get the water out that wherever it could push up, it did. It was an amazing thing to watch.